Mr. Dutton, really nice to see you. Thanks for your
Ellen.
time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So Kathleen, the desperate mum of Audrey Griffin, she wants to know why our leaders aren't stepping up.
Well, I think Audrey's circumstance and the circumstance for many other women, in fact, in 2024, the number of women, about 78, who were killed as a result of violence, it's just completely and utterly unacceptable. It's a part of our culture that needs to be addressed. I think there are many reasons for it, and I think it's really been compounded as a problem with online violence and hatred and the demeaning of women, the normalisation of sexual assault against women. I think there are many elements to it, and I honestly think it's a national conversation, and it's really, I can't think of a higher priority for us as a country than for leaders across parties, across states and territories in the Commonwealth coming together to work out how we stop this scourge, because these cases are just horrific.
See, and when you say it's a priority, and we've heard both sides of politics say that, we've rarely heard it mentioned until in this last week. We haven't seen a lot of money thrown at the problem. So how do you say it is honestly a priority?
Well, we've announced, as you know, additional funding this week that builds on top of $3.5 billion. I established the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation. So there are many angles to the treatment of women, the demeaning of women, sexual assault, financial coercion, people who can't leave relationships because they've got matters bogged down in the family court and financially they just can't afford to go out on their own. Or you have other cases where some innocent girl is walking home of a night time and is confronted, accosted by some monster who shouldn't have been on the street in the first place. So there are bail laws, and there are many aspects to it, which is why I think my point that everybody needs to be at the table to work out what we can do to turn the dial and to change the culture.
Your commitment this time around is an additional $90 million. And look, it sounds like a lot of money until you think that domestic violence costs our economy $26 billion a year. And I feel like when we hear some really horrific cases, and they're all so horrible, but there are just some that stop us in our tracks, then we say no more, and then it just gets ignored again.
Well, I think it's a fair observation, and I think people rightly are angry at the individual cases and the tragedy for that family, the horrific circumstances, and I think you're right. I think the media cycle moves on so quickly. The next day's news is something completely different, and people then move on to that story. And
do you think our politicians are doing enough?
I don't think any of us are doing enough. I think that's the reality. I've dedicated my life after 10 years in the police and a career since then to protection of women and children, and it horrifies me to see these cases. It horrifies me that for our own family you need to have on your apps, on your phone, the ability to see where your kids are, to make sure that your daughter is in a cab and in an Uber that's a genuine Uber, that she's with friends or is being, safe in the environment that she's in at a nightclub or whatever. I mean, all of these things I'm sure for generations have run through parents' minds, but I think it's compounded, and I think it's a bigger issue today than it's ever been. And as I say, it's the online hatred, it's the violence in the computer games, it's the acceptance in any family unit of violence, and young boys watching the behaviour of their father or watching a violent relationship play out as if that's normal, and that's something that then influences their own behaviour toward their girlfriend later on. There are so many aspects to it, and I really truly believe that there's goodwill on both sides of politics. The Prime Minister and I would find common ground in wanting to fight every day against domestic violence, but there are many elements to it, as I say, and it's not just about money. To see somebody like Audrey walking home accosted, and this, I don't know the full detail, but presumably somebody who's not known to her, and somebody who is out on bail who shouldn't be. That's not a money issue. That is somebody who is deranged and shouldn't have been out on the streets, at least it seems from what I've read. And that family will never ever recover from that loss. And it's horrific to imagine any of those circumstances, what she went through, what other women in similar circumstances have gone through. And we absolutely must do everything we can. But to your point, is enough being done? Well, clearly not.
You've said that women feeling safe in their own homes is a lifetime passion of yours. With that in mind, this additional 90 million that you're promising, is that enough?
Well, again, it'll never be enough, but it's on the back of $3.5 billion. So there's a lot of money that goes in, but again, insufficient. But there are different things that we need to do through our education system, which is not necessarily even involving money. It's part of the curriculum. I think financial management is a part of the discussion as well. I've spoken to many couples over the course of this campaign period, let alone in years 4, where the tension that rises in a family where if they can't afford to pay the bills, people are fighting over not enough dollars, and then they separate. They're trying to run 2 households, and so the financial pressures just continue to mount. There are people who use that financial coercion to try and run one party out of money before matters are settled before the court. Some of these things don't require any money from the Commonwealth. It's a change of culture and attitude, and the laws need to be strengthened, which doesn't require money, but there needs to be a preparedness to do so at a state level in relation to the bail laws and at a federal level in relation to the family court system and other aspects of social security, etc.
23 years ago, you stood up as an ex-Queensland cop and gave your maiden speech in Parliament, and you spoke about crime rates being too high, sentences too lenient, and your disdain for the politically correct. What does 2 decades in Canberra do to a person's perspective?
Well, you can see what it does to them physically. It's been a hard 23 years. I think, look, I had 10 years as a police officer, and you have to remind yourself in that job that you're dealing with, it's a small percentage of the population who are truly terrible people who are committing the most egregious crimes, one of which we've just spoken about. And you have to remind yourself that you're there supporting a victim of crime in probably the most horrific moment in their life. And you have to show compassion, and you need to show determination and dedication to make that situation peaceful, to apprehend the offender, to prosecute it through the courts. And I do, in that circumstance, I was always conscious of not losing perspective there. And similarly in this job as well, I think, I like to think that I've kept my feet on the ground, and I've really always stayed true to my values and what I believe in. And there's always more that you want to do in public life, but there are many cases, the Deirdre Kennedy case, which was a horrible case where a young baby got murdered in Queensland, the most beautiful family. They were denied justice to this very day. But we were able to reform the laws around double jeopardy, which meant that other families weren't going to go through that. So there are some incredibly powerful parts alongside the frustrating parts where you can't get the outcome that you want.
Yeah. People are still trying to figure you out. Yeah. Why is it so hard for you to convince them of the funny, sensitive guy that your family and friends talk about?
Look, I just think people make their judgments, and sometimes it's fairly or unfairly. In the end, I don't think your physical appearance matters much, but it probably influences how people see you. And I think the tough jobs that I've had in defence and immigration, etc., have given that tough edge. And obviously, as a police officer as well, I think you become defined by that as well. So you're sort of a tough man of politics, as I've seen written. But in the end, I'm a father of 3. I care very passionately about people, and when you look at the tough decisions I've taken, the kicking out of sex offenders and people who had committed acts of sexual assault against children, people who had been involved in motorcycle gangs selling drugs to kids, I wore that as a badge of honour. Now, some people say, oh, well, you were too tough in kicking out those bikies or those criminals. But for me, when I looked at the rap sheet of some of these people, they had committed rape 2 or 3 times. There were more victims, certainly in my judgment, to come in some of those cases as well. And by getting rid of them out of the country, I think, I was proud of the fact that it probably saved a number of Australian women from falling victim to that offender again. Now,
so here then goes that problem, right? Because if women then should be leaning in and applauding that kind of strength, but it's not what's happening. And and it's not all women, but particularly those of working age, they don't seem to like you.
Well, sometimes people don't see the detail of that, and they see what the 5-second grab on the 6 o'clock news, or they listen to the $20 million of advertising, the negative mud throwing, but all of which is based on lies at the moment that's been thrown against me. But I just don't think that matters, because in the end, I think people will make a judgment about, okay, well, I may not like the look of that guy, or I may not agree with him on this or that, but I get the sense that he would do the right thing by our country and by our family. And if times get tough and there is a conflict in our region, or there is a world recession, or we need to make decisions to keep our community safe, I think he can probably, do that for us. And
do you honestly think you can win from
there's
this point?
no question in my mind that we can win. And when you look at the seat-by-seat polling and tracking that we're doing, and there's a lot of polling around at the moment, and
lots of polling and bookies too. And I know we always say don't worry about the polls, but I mean,
at
the bookies normally get it right. You're at $5 and they're at $1.16.
Well, in 2019, I think we're at $4, and they paid out before the election day. So Bill Shorten was definitely going to be the Prime Minister. And as it turned out, that wasn't the case. Bill Shorten lost. And when I look at the polling now, it's telling me that there are a lot of Australians who are still unsure as to what they're going to do, which is why...
Doesn't that also tell you that you haven't managed to convince them?
Well, I think it says that they're probably influenced by some of the negative campaigning and the mud that's been thrown by the Prime Minister and the dishonesty.
Pretty sure I've seen a couple of coalition ads that have been a bit of mudslinging.
Well, there's the negative ads, but some of the stuff...
but yours are truthful and theirs are not.
Well, I think ours... But if, like ours say, sort of hard-hitting... black and red or whatever, groceries up by 30%, that's the reality. Ours say electricity up by 34%, that's the reality. People have stopped renewing their insurance on their car because it's up by 35%. That's not a lie. When the Prime Minister says, oh, well, we're going to sell Medicare and these scare campaigns, it's just completely and utterly baseless. Bulk billing's down by 11% under this government, and people know they're paying more out of pocket to go and see a doctor, but that they've run that scare campaign. Now, what I think is more important than all of that is what the two parties have to offer. And in the suburbs at the moment, there are a lot of families who realise that they've really been hit hard over the last 3 years. They are the forgotten Australians who I think will make a decision between now and next Saturday. And I think they will look at the coalition and realise that we manage the economy well, that we make good decisions in relation to investing in defence to keep us safe, that our crime policy is all about making women and children and men and pensioners and older Australians safer than what they are now. And I think they will be the deciding factors. And the Prime Minister's basically promising 3 more years of the same. Well, I just don't think we can afford that. We've had the biggest fall in our living standards compared to any other comparable country over the last 3 years. There are about 30,000 small businesses that have gone broke, and each one of them has either lost their house, lost their savings, lost their dream. And I want to make sure that we can restore the values that people can identify with, and that is that we manage the economy well and we benefit from that. I don't want to see people having to work... But are you
giving them a vision, or is it just feels like a lot of sweeteners?
I think there is a short-term response that we've got, which is the 25 cent a litre cut in fuel and diesel. There's the $1,200 tax rebate to help people now, because I want people to know that we've heard what they've said and we've listened to them as we've travelled around the country. They say we need help now. And so we do that straight away. But the bigger picture, the bigger vision for the country is what's underlying the increase in food prices and the 35% increase in insurance. What have we got to do to fix that up so that those pressures don't continue on?
There are also pressures that are felt all around the world. We're not
to the
alone
extent,
in this.
Ali, they're just not. Like in Australia, we've had 12 interest rate increases, and the Reserve Bank governor has said, look, if you keep spending money, government, you're going to drive inflation up. That interest rates came down long before they started to come down in Australia, in the US, in the UK, in Canada and New Zealand. They've come down by a lousy 25% points, 0.25 of 1%. They went up on 12 occasions under this government. Prices for food are through the roof here. We're paying 3 times the cost of electricity compared to parts of the United States and Canada and in Europe. And it's why the cost of building a house is the highest in the world. The government's had this big Australia policy. They've blown out the numbers through the migration program. 1 million people have come over the last 2 years, a 70% increase on any previous 2-year period. That's why we've got a housing crisis, because they want a house as well, but young Aussie kids are being locked out. So the government has made a lot of problems really bad problems for Australian families, and they're feeling it. And I honestly believe, yes, the short-term support is required through the 25 cent a litre cut, through the $1,200 tax rebate, but also our policy to create an energy system where instead of exporting all of our gas, we bring that back in. That drops the price of wholesale gas by 23%. That's how we start to bring down the cost of food and the cost of other items across the economy, because everything we use requires energy, and energy is the economy. And Labor's renewables only policy at the moment is what, in good part, has driven up the cost of everything. We want renewables in the system, but we've got to be able to have a baseload power, which is gas and electricity, and to get prices down.
Do you still think nuclear power is the answer?
I very much so. And I look at what is happening in 19 of the top 20 economies in the world at the moment. They're either signed up to or they're using nuclear now. Australia is the only big economy that hasn't signed up to nuclear. It's zero emissions. It's 44% cheaper than Labor's renewables only
But
policy.
I think this is your drama, because I don't think anyone actually believes it's going to cost what you say it's going to cost.
I
There
think
hasn't
that's-
been a major infrastructure project in this country that's come in on budget. Ever.
So frontier economics, without getting into all sort of the boring detail of the modelling, frontier economics is the best modeller on energy policy.
Okay, did they do the NBN? Did they do Snowy Hydro?
No,
did
they're
they
the
do
best.
those figures?
They're the best modeller when it comes to energy. Now,
Do you know if they did Snowy Hydro
No,
figures?
they didn't do Snowy Hydro. So
Because that one's blown out.
of
It was
course
going to be
of-
$2 billion now.
Of course
it's
it
almost
has.
13.
And your point about contracting and all the rest of it, all of that's reasonably made. But my point in relation to our claim around 44% cheaper, it's been done by the best independent economist in the country, who's been used by Labor governments. And the reason that you know that you can place some faith in it is that the Labor Party has never disputed the claim. It's been put out there now for 6 months. Our policy is 44% cheaper than Labor's. Labor has never disputed that figure. The Prime Minister, you won't find any remarks that he says that is not true. And in terms of the gas, we use the same company, 23% cheaper. If we do that, gas is used to create electricity. We can
I
bring
also
those
think that
costs down.
this is the problem just with politics across the board. I think you throw these figures out. It's like Anthony Albanese saying $275 off your electricity bill. And then you turn around and say circumstances have changed and sorry, we can't do it. And you all do it. And I think sitting at home when we hear it, we don't believe it.
Well, Ellie, I think there's a difference between promising on 97 occasions that you drop power prices by $275 per year, which the Prime Minister did, knowing that he could never deliver it. Now, I'm not out there saying that we're making up figures and that we're just plucking things from the air. We're not. I've run businesses and done it very successfully. I've been the Defence Minister, the Immigration Minister, the Health Minister, the Home Affairs Minister. I've had experience in government and I've got an experienced team. We have the ability to clean up Labor's mess, exactly as John Howard did after Paul Keating. And Labor will always run up debt, they always tax, they can't manage the economy. And they've demonstrated that, including to this very day in Victoria, where they're doing enormous damage to the economy. So one of the core strengths of the Liberal Party is that we do know how to manage the economy and we do know how to manage national security and keep us safe. And I think they're two core issues that people will be focusing on when they make their decision as to who to vote for at this election.
Well, in this campaign, you're outspending Labor when it comes to campaign promises more than 3 to 1.
Well, that's just, I've seen that calculation. It's not right. It doesn't include some of the early announcements that Labor made before the campaign proper, and our responsibility, as we demonstrated in government.
You're making a lot of promises. Are you trying to buy the job?
No, we're not. We're saying that there's no sense travelling the country for the last 3 years, listening to people in tears saying we need help now, and then not doing anything about it. And so it costs money to cut the fuel tax by 25 cents a litre. But we've done it, and we've done it because we want to help people immediately. And it's not just families or tradies or pensioners, it's university students, it's delivery truck drivers, it's economy-wide. And as we did during the course of COVID with JobSeeker and JobKeeper, we provided support to people. We knew how to manage the economy then to keep people in jobs, to keep businesses open. But we didn't bake that in so that it was still being paid today. We provided that response at the time when the economy required that response. And that's exactly the approach that we've taken now.
So you are not stressed about the size of the deficit that you're putting forward because of campaign promises? Because, I mean, I feel like no one's talking about how we're going to pay this back. And is it going to be that next generation who already feel like home ownership is out of their reach, we're going to then go, oh, and by the way, pay for all this stuff that we couldn't afford, but we spent anyway?
Well, we've identified savings of about $100 billion. We've said that we don't support the government in some of their programs, but there are other programs which we do support. As a dad, I mean, take out, one of your sick children to see a GP, or your own health is better served by having a good relationship with a GP or with a practice. So we've put more money into general practice because we've got an ageing population of general practitioners. So we want to have a strong healthcare system. We need to pay for it. We need to pay for the cut in fuel excise and to give the $1,200 back because people need help now. And then that's the short-term interim solution. We don't say that we cut it forever. What we're saying is we provide people with support now, and then how do we fix up the economy from there so that we can have a long-term sustainable position to start paying down debt, to cut waste out of the system as people are having to do in their own budgets now. All of that, I think, demonstrates that we have the same Liberal Party values that people know serve them well, because we manage the economy more effectively than Labor. And that's always been the case.
I think one of the main criticisms has been that your policies seem thin and they seem rushed. Do you just not have the talent in the ranks anymore?
Well, if you have a look at what we've got on offer, it's the biggest change to our energy system in our country's history. It's the creation of an East Coast gas reserve, which we've been working on for 3 years. And it hasn't been picked apart at all by the government. It hasn't been criticised by anyone at all, perhaps some cynical people within, sort of left-wing online media stuff. But BlueScope, one of our biggest producers of steel product in the country, has praised our policy. They're manufacturing Colorbond for roofs and steel that we use in house frames, etc. It costs them 3 times the price to turn on their machines in Australia compared to the US. They're saying that our energy policy is a game changer. So how do we reduce the cost of construction so we can help home ownership become a reality again? We do it through an energy policy. So to have worked on it for 3 years, it has not been criticised or picked apart by the government. It will transform our economy, and we can start to do it from day one. So by the end of this calendar year, we're stopping that gas from being exported and bringing it back into the domestic market so we can increase supply. That's what brings prices down. And as I say, everything we sit on, our cars that we drive, the roads, our houses, all of it requires energy to produce our food. And if we can bring the cost of cold storage down for the farmer, or bring the cost of fertiliser production down by bringing gas prices down by 23%, that's how we can clean up Labor's mess. And so the policies that we've got, I think, are incredibly bold, and I think they do help families, and they do help build up a resilience in the economy and fix up the mess that Labor's created.
You know what I actually wish we could do with big issues like energy and defence, because you guys think in a 3-year cycle, which I understand you have to with an election. These are really big issues. I wish we could take energy and defence out of politicians' hands and make it not political.
Well,
we might actually have an idea. Like you guys are so far apart on what you want.
I just don't think that's the case in the case of defence, for example. So we signed up with the United States and the United Kingdom to the AUKUS deal, which was the nuclear submarine deal. We did that because ultimately we're a small island nation in the middle of nowhere with a population of 27 million people. We can't compete against big nuclear superpowers. We need to have strong allies.
Billions has been wasted over the years in defence spending.
Well, I'll just finish this point because I think it's a really important point. To the government's credit, to the now government's credit, when Anthony was the leader of the opposition, he supported the position that we took. Now, that is essentially an 80-year commitment. It's not a 3-year cycle. And all of that is designed to keep us safe in a very uncertain world. So I don't think we have a difference of opinion in terms of the fact that we need to keep our country safe. I think both parties, of course, aspire to that. The question is the pathway you take to get there. The government's cut $80 billion out of defence. We've promised an additional $21 billion over the next 5 years because we need to pay for the submarines, and we need to pay for the guided weapon systems, and we need to pay for the new F-35s, etc. Because we can't pretend that if we want to keep our kids and our grandkids safe, that we just pull money out of defence. The Prime Minister rightly says that we live in the most precarious period since 1945, since the end of the Second World War. I agree with that, but we have to do something about it. So I think there might be a point of difference about how we get to the end destination, but the desire to keep our country safe, any person in politics would want to see that.
How's your relationship with Scott Morrison?
It's good.
Have you asked for any advice during the campaign?
No, I've swapped messages with Scott. I've swapped messages with John Howard, with Tony Abbott, and others. And one of the things in this job as Leader of the Opposition is you do get a lot of free advice from people, probably starting from those you went to primary school with right through to this very day. So my phone fills each day with lots of advice, and all of it well-intentioned from good friends and people, including former leaders and colleagues that I've worked with.
Are you worried about your own seat of Dixon? It's the most marginal seat in Queensland.
Well, Dixon had a one-term curse where Cheryl Kerner held it for 1 year, one term. Michael Lavarch held it for one term. Tony Smith held it for one term. I've been fortunate enough to hold it since 2001, so for 24 years. And I've done that because I've worked hard locally. My family, we've raised our kids there. My family history goes back to the 1860s in that area. I've worked hard, but it's a marginal seat. It always has been. And the Greens and Get Up and the Labor Party and others, the unions, have always thrown a lot of resource at it. We've got a Teal now who's really a Green pretending to be a Teal, and I think people will see through that, and I think they are. And I've got to say that the feeling on the ground from our volunteers is that the mood's quite positive, and they know that I've worked hard locally, and to be honest, the polling there shows a swing to us, and Labor can try and create this scare campaign, which they did. But do you know how that originated? It originated in a fundraising email sent out by Labor to say, donate to the Labor Party because we think we can defeat Peter Dutton in his seat. Like, it's just, it's pretty basic sort of politicking 101. But unfortunately, some gullible people in the media picked that up. I think this election is about how we help Australians and how we help them deal with the cost of living crisis that they're facing. I want to be the Prime Minister for home ownership, for young kids in my electorate, but right across the country who are working their guts out. They're saving, they're paying rent, they're putting off having kids so that they can get into housing.
Should they seriously have to dip into their super to be able to afford their first home?
Well, why is their super invested into a home that somebody else owns? A home is just another asset, but it's an important asset. And let's say that 5 years ago, you'd allowed a young Australian to access their super, $50,000, to help them with a home deposit. They bought the home. 5 years later, they might be $200,000 better off because of having purchased that home. If they weren't able to take the 50 grand out of their super, they would still be renting and they'd be worse off. Now, our policy requires that young person, when they sell the house in 10 years' time or 20 years' time, to put the money back into super. And super is important, but we don't want to deny people the opportunity to purchase a house. But our other policy in that regard is young people, first home buyers, for the first $650,000 of their mortgage, being able to claim the interest repayments as a tax deduction, which will help by about $1,000 a month over the first 5 years of the loan. So it's about $12,000 a year for the first 5 years, and it's going to help them get into a house more quickly. And we put $5 billion into building 500,000 new homes, working with councils to pay for the infrastructure and the water and the sewerage upgrades, etc. So we want to bring more housing online so that young people can get into those houses as well.
So in years to come, say grandkids of yours, if you're blessed to have them come to you and say,
not just yet, not just yet. So I hope the kids are watching in a few years' time.
In a few years' time.
Yes.
But if they do come to you and say, Pop, why are there so many bushfires and floods? What do you say to them?
Well, I say to them that climate change can be a factor in that, but also we live in a country which has been well documented for thousands of years before we got here in terms of flooding plains and the bushfires and the devastation of flood and cyclone. I come from a state, I remember very clearly as a young policeman in Townsville, rain events, cyclone events, flooding, and
but they are more frequent and they tend to be more severe.
If you're voting, if your main motivation at this election, regardless of how old you are, is how do we address climate change and how do we reduce our emissions, nuclear energy is the solution that people are looking for. The Labor Party in the UK is headed by Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He has been out and proud in relation to his support of nuclear power. It's supported by the Tories, by the Liberal Party there as well. They don't believe, as Keir Starmer himself has said, They can't achieve net zero by 2050 without nuclear power. Now, that's not just Keir Starmer. It's the Labor Party equivalent in France, where they have 70% nuclear power. It's the view of the United States Republican and Democrat parties that they can't achieve their emissions reductions, they can't keep their lights on, and they can't deliver cheap power without nuclear. And it's similarly the
But you're
case
also
in
talking
Canada
about
as well.
countries that have had it for a very long time.
Well, yes, but there are countries like the United Kingdom who are investing into small modular reactors, as is the case now around the world, because they know that it's 44% cheaper, it's reliable. We're going to suffer blackouts and brownouts in this country. We can't pretend that the batteries last for more than 4 hours, or that the wind and solar, which is being generated, that we invested into as a government, that we support, is going to last tonight through the hours of darkness. We just have, I think that the reality is replacing some of the emotion. And if the wind and solar was free, as the Prime Minister tells Australians, your power bills wouldn't have gone up by $1,300.
But I feel like during this campaign, there's been a few things we've heard a lot about and things we haven't heard much about. And it's almost like climate change and the environment are dirty words.
Well, if you have a look at the polling at the moment, the biggest issue by a country mile is cost of living. And so Australians are telling us that their biggest concern at this election is their increase in their mortgage, their increase in their food, grocery bills, their increase in electricity costs, which are up by 32%, gas is up by 34%. That is the number one issue.
So does that mean we don't care
well,
about the
it
other
means
things?
that Australians at the moment are saying that the biggest issue for them is the cost of living, which is why the media is concentrated on cost of living and why we've responded with how we can help families, because
And we get
that's the
emails
biggest
in all the
issue.
time. We have no debate with you on this one. Yeah. Absolutely, cost of living. But I think people still care about things like the environment.
Of course they
the
do.
world
And,
we live our,
and
our
if they
kids.
do, and clearly people see it as a priority, and others have different views, but for those who see it as a priority, they know that our policy is based on science.
Do
and
you see it as a
economics.
priority?
Yeah, I do. And that's why, frankly, nuclear energy delivers three things for us. One, it firms up the renewables that we've got in the system. So we need a baseload 24/7 permanent power. That's going to be replacing coal-fired generation as that phases out. Gas
Do you reckon we'll honestly one day have nuclear power?
There's no question in my mind. And Ali, I'll just say this. If you look at what Bill Gates says, one of the smartest guys in the world, he says per square metre of impact on the environment, you should try and get the maximum yield of energy, the maximum amount of electricity. He says, why would you not use nuclear power? Because for every square metre that you use impact on the environment, you need thousands of square metres or kilometres of solar or wind or offshore wind to achieve the same electricity output.
So if it's so great, why isn't everyone on board with it?
Well, as I say, have a look at the international debate. I've challenged the Prime Minister 6 months ago to a debate on nuclear power. He's not stepped up to the mark. He knows that his policy is all about trying to please inner city Greens, and he's out there scaring people. If the Prime Minister had a great 3 years, if he'd had a cracking first term, and people's power prices were down and people were, feeling much better in their own budgets and their business hadn't gone broke, he'd be out there running the mother campaign, the mother of all campaigns, saying, how good am I, vote me back in. He's not doing that because they've had a shocker. And that's been reflected in people's budgets, in their own lives. And that's why he's running a scare campaign, because he doesn't want to talk about his 3 failed years. And in relation
if he's had such a shocker then, why is it that you're in the fight for your life?
Well, the first-term government hasn't lost since 1931. So in our country, there's an instinct to say, well, we'll give him a go. He's just had 3 years. But I think increasingly, and as I say, this is why 30% of people, 1 in 3 roughly Australians, either haven't decided or are soft in their voting intention right now.
Do you think you're match fit?
I think there's no question we're match fit. And I think we've got the policies on the plate. We've been bold. Nuclear is not a vote-winning policy. It's the right thing to do for our country. And I'm prepared to provide people with support now to help them through what's a really difficult period in their lives. And then I'm going to fix the economy and get our country back on track. And that includes the energy situation, because as I pointed out before, energy is the economy. And if we keep driving up prices, as the Prime Minister's policy does, it won't be a 30% increase in groceries in 2 years' time. Groceries will be up by 40%. And I just don't think families can afford 3 more years of that.
Has Donald Trump messed things up for you?
Look, I think there have been a lot of disruptions in this campaign. The cyclone in Queensland, obviously, tragically, the Pope's passing, the United States, the tariff war, etc. All of those are influences in the campaign. There's no question about that. But ultimately, what people are deciding on is whether Anthony Albanese will be given 3 more years or whether it's time for a change of government and we can implement the policies which can help families, not hurt them. And that's the choice people have to make. There will always be international factors. There'll be avian bird flus and there'll be terrorist attacks and there'll be all the economic shocks that we've seen in years past. What we need is a strong government capable of managing the economy, of keeping the cost of living pressures down, not allowing them to race away, of keeping us safe. I have an absolute passion in keeping women and children safe, of driving down crime in our communities, in our suburbs, and keeping our country safe through a proper investment in defence over the course of the coming years and decades. And we can deliver that, and I believe that we can win the election. And if we do so, then we can help a lot of Australians.
So what do you think the biggest mistake is that you've made, and how have you learnt from it?
I haven't called out the Prime Minister's lies. That's, I think, one of the mistakes that we've made. We've sat there and listened to the Prime Minister talk about Mediscare when bulk billing's down by 11%. And it's costing you $36 plus out of pocket every time you go to see the doctor. And he's pretended to people that you just need your green Medicare card. It's built on just a house of cards. They've been out there talking about the costs and cuts, etc. Again, it's a complete fabrication.
So your problem is you've been too nice.
I think.
Is what you're saying.
Well, I think we've taken a decision to talk about our positive plan, and we haven't spent enough time calling out what has been just a mudslinging exercise. And as I said, it's a deliberate strategy, because if the government had a track record over the last 3 years that they were proud of, they'd be telling Australians about that, and Australians would be lining up to vote for them on that basis.
But you've also then turned around and said that the Prime Minister is the weakest and the worst that we've ever had. I mean, that's a bit mean too, isn't it?
Well, I think objectively, if you have a look at, and it's reflected again in conversations with Australians around the country, they don't see the Prime Minister as a strong leader. And they do think that, for example, with The Voice, that some of the Indigenous leaders and others in the business community just walked straight over the top of him. And he spent $450 million. It divided our country. And similarly in relation to some of the economic decisions, appointing Kevin Rudd. Kevin Rudd wanted to go to be the ambassador in the United States. Anthony Albanese wasn't strong enough to say, look, I don't think it's the right thing for our country. And now the Prime Minister can't even get a phone call or a meeting with the US administration. So I think there is a factual basis to that. And ultimately, people don't have to like you, but they can respect you for having the ability to make tough decisions that are in our country's best interests, and also the experience that we bring to the table. I've dealt
Are
with
you glad it's almost over?
I'm sure every...
Is your family glad it's almost over?
I think every Australian will be glad when the campaign's over, because it'll allow them to get back to their lives. And we live in the greatest country in the world, there's no question about that. And it's an inconvenience every 3 years. I get that. But when you look at what's happening around the world at the moment, given that we've just commemorated Anzac Day as well, we have a lot to be grateful for in this country, and I'm incredibly proud to be an Australian. I want the best for our country. I want to make sure that young girls can grow up in a safe environment. I want to make sure people can live out their dreams and their aspirations, that they can be rewarded for their hard work, that their families can get ahead, and that their kids can be educated and taken care of and achieve more in life than what you were able to achieve as a parent yourself. I want all of that for our country, and I think that's what this election is about.
And if you don't win, is that it for Peter Dutton and politics?
Well, I've been in politics since 2001, so it's a long time. I've never deviated from the values and what I stand for and what I believe in, and that'll never change. But I have every intention of winning on May 3, and if we do so, I believe we can get our country back on track and really help families get over what's been a really bad 3 years.
That is exactly the way I knew a politician of 23 years would answer that question.
Well, and funny, because I knew that a seasoned journalist would ask such a question as the last one. So it's been nice to have a chat. Thank you.
Yeah, and good luck with the rest of the campaign. I think you're hitting 28 more seats in the final days. Good luck with it.
That's what the job brings. So I look forward to meeting a lot of people between now and Saturday. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Dutton.
Thanks, Ali.